Our guest this week grew up in Lansing, Michigan, earned a BS in criminal justice from Michigan State University, while playing cornerback for 4 seasons, and then received a master's degree in human resources from Central Michigan University. After playing in the NFL for 3 seasons, he was a lieutenant in the Michigan State University Police Department. Since 2010, he's been in leadership roles in the MSU Athletic Department, and since 2021, has been the Vice President and Director of Athletics at Michigan State University. His name, Alan Haller. And I'm Jack Krasula, and this is Anything is Possible on 760 WJR. Alan, welcome and honor to have you.
Jack, it's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me to be on your show. I'm excited to spend some time with you.
All right, let's go back to your childhood.
Yeah.
Your mom and your dad, please.
Wow. So I grew up in the Lansing, Michigan area, from Milwaukee, born in Milwaukee, and moved to Lansing, I think I was 8 or 9 years old, 3rd grade. My dad was a pastor, and then my mom was a high school math teacher for the city of East Lansing public schools. So grew up in Lansing and, grew up in the church and grew up in that community, went to school in the Lansing public schools. And so it was a great childhood. I have 2 sisters. My oldest sister is a attorney in Denver, and then my middle sister, she's older than me, is a nurse for Sparrow Hospital in Lansing.
What's the biggest thing, Ellen, you learned from Mom, and what's the biggest thing you learned from Dad?
You know, my parents were never like words people, like say do this or do that. What I learned is their servant leadership and the way they connected with the community and people just through their actions. And so I learned how to treat people, how to speak to people, how to be, a servant in the community just simply by being around my parents and how they interacted with people and how they talked about people and the conversations we had in our household about people. And, one of the biggest lessons I learned from my mom is how to treat people you don't necessarily agree with. And my mom was such a beautiful soul. I don't think I've ever heard her say anything negative about anyone, but she had strong opinions. And I learned how to have strong opinions without necessarily being divisive or, in a way of putting people down. And my dad, being a pastor, had to deal with all types of communities and different types of people. And we traveled to Africa as a kid. We traveled to England as a kid. We traveled all around the country in our brown Buick station wagon. So I really learned how to interact with a lot of different people. When we were in Milwaukee and I was growing up, I lived in an all-black neighborhood, all black. And when we moved to Lansing, Michigan, it was an all-white neighborhood. And I had never really been around, white people, but just the way that my parents treated people, it allowed me to kind of go into those different spaces and still be able to learn. And that was it was a great period of my life, and it helped me with what I did later in life in terms of being a athletic director, police officer in the NFL, a student at Michigan State, because it's such a diverse community.
You were a star running back at Sexton High School in Lansing, and then you go to MSU, and Coach George Pearl says, I'm going to have you be a cornerback, a safety, starter for 3 seasons. Talk about MSU and the football career.
Wow. So, yes, I got a lot of scholarship offers coming out of high school, fortunately, because I was running track and football. And I originally wanted to go to UCLA. I'll be honest, I'm a Spartan, but I wanted to go to UCLA originally. Went out there, Jack, my official visit to UCLA was in January. Okay, so we know what the weather is like here in Michigan. Go out to Los Angeles in January. There were convertibles. The weather was great. So I'm like, I want to come here. Got home. My dad said, you know what? Your mom is having a hard time with that decision. It's too far. So I basically decommitted from UCLA. Took some more visits, and then, my parents first fell in love with Coach Perlis. He came to the house, and he had dinner with us, and then I committed later that year. Nick Saban was actually the defensive coordinator, so Nick was my primary recruiter.
You made him.
No, I do have a Nick Saban story after I talk a little bit about Michigan State. But as a true freshman, I go in, and this experience as a true freshman really helped me understand how to always try to do your best in the time, because you really never know circumstances that are going to be placed in front of you. So I came, I was a true freshman thinking I was on third or fourth string, thinking I was going to redshirt. I have a whole year to just kind of develop and maybe even goof off a little bit because I thought I wasn't going to play. Well, within a 2-week time period, my freshman year, the person in front of me, the player in front of me, actually broke his neck and got hurt. He couldn't play again. The second person also got hurt. And so I went from third string to first string in a matter of a couple of weeks, really without anything that I did, just except for being prepared. And I played and started some of my freshman year, just simply because, one, I was ready, but two, the circumstances in front of me happened that, kind of pushed me up. So that really, implanted in my mind about just being ready in life because you really never know what the circumstances are going to be in front of you.
The Nick Saban story, please.
Yeah, so Nick Saban was my primary recruiter. And when I committed to Michigan State in February of 1988, well, 2 or 3 weeks later, Nick Saban takes the defensive backs coach position at the Houston Oilers. And so I was really excited to play for Nick. Nick called me up and he said, "Hey, Alan, I'm going to the Oilers, but hey, you just never know later in life if I can ever do anything for you. I'm going to do that." Well, you fast forward from that time period, 4.5 years later, I was a rookie at the Pittsburgh Steelers, and the Steelers cut me. And Saban was the defensive coordinator for the Cleveland Browns at the time. And that was the first call I got was from Nick Saban saying, "Hey, we're going to pick you up. You're now a Cleveland Brown." So I practiced Tuesday in Pittsburgh and then got in my car after I got cut and drove to Cleveland and practiced in Cleveland that Wednesday.
We're talking to Alan Heller. When we'll come back, we'll talk about his 3 years in the NFL, the Steelers, the Browns, and the Panthers.
Yes.
And I'm Jack Krasula, and this is Anything is Possible on 760 WJR. This is Anything is Possible. I'm your host, Jack Krasula. We're with Alan Heller, who played in the NFL for 3 years, the Steelers, the Browns, and the Panthers. These players, Ellen, keep getting faster and bigger, with one exception. The cornerbacks don't really get that bigger. Okay? They're still 6 foot, 180 pounds, 6'1", 190. They're going against guys who are 360, these tackles, and running backs 250. Why? One, how do these cornerbacks survive? And two, why don't they get bigger?
Well, you got to be fast. You got to be able to turn and run with receivers that are running 4.3 and then also come up and tackle, running backs that are 220. So you got to be able to run, and you can't run with a lot of weight or be very fluid. So that's one of the reasons why cornerbacks are smaller. And then also for me, I actually wanted to be a receiver. I just couldn't catch. I could knock the ball down, but I couldn't catch. So I had to shift more towards cornerback because my hands were like kind of a little stone cold. But,
all right, talk about the speed in the NFL versus the speed in the college game.
Yeah, it was and is much different. I had always been maybe one of the fastest player on my teams growing up in Little League and high school and even college, because I ran track. I was always one of the fastest players. Well, I got to the Steelers, and we had testing day our first day, and there were 8 defensive backs, and I think I was the 5th fastest defensive back and maybe the 12th fastest person on the team. So the speed of the game is much, much different, and the players are a little bigger, but then they run a little bit faster and they're stronger, which you would think, because you're talking pretty much about the top 3% of players that ever played the game.
Who was the best you ever played with or against?
Rod Woodson by far was the best I ever played with. The way he prepared, and he's a Hall of Famer, and the guy was, at the time, he was an NFL All-Pro, but he was the hardest working player on the team. He was always prepared for practice. He took care of his body. In the off season, he trained really hard. So that really taught me, a lot of this, some of talent is God-given. But at the end of the day, even God-given talent goes nowhere unless you do something with it. And I really learned kind of a work ethic from him and attention to detail and really being in tune with, one, your goals, but then the work you have to do to get to those.
And the best you ever played against?
Well, I was fortunate my second year, I came back to the Steelers, and I was always a Herschel Walker fan. And Herschel Walker was playing for the Philadelphia Eagles at the time. And it was a preseason game, And I was on the kickoff team. He was on the kickoff return team. He returned a kick, and they credited me, Jack. They credited me for a tackle, but at the end of the day, he actually tripped over me. And when I stood up,
like a Neon Deion Sanders type tackle, right?
it was, I was on the ground and he fell over me, and I get up. I'll never forget this. It was at Three River Stadium, and they said Alan Haller on the tackle, and I was like, "Oh man, I just tackled Herschel Walker," but not really.
All right, let's move ahead. You end your NFL career. You come back to Lansing.
Let me correct that. I didn't end my NFL career. I was cut 8 different times in the NFL. So the NFL made it clear, like, Alan, we think you've extended your stay here. When I used to go on family trips with the kids, I was able to pack really quickly, and my daughter used to always ask me, how did you learn how to pack so quickly? Well, when you're cut in the NFL, basically they call you in and say, you're out of here. You got to go back to your room, pack, and get out of there. So that's one of the things I learned from my NFL experience is how to pack real quickly.
So, all right, you come back to Lansing, and for 13 years, you're with the MSU Police Department. Talk about that chapter in your life.
Yeah, that... I was a criminal justice major at Michigan State, so I knew I wanted to be in some type of law enforcement, whether it was the federal government, local, and initially I wanted to be in the FBI. Everybody wants to be in the FBI. Well, you can't just go right into the FBI. You have to have what they call 3 years of professional experience, and the NFL at the time didn't qualify for that professional experience. So I said, you know what, I'm gonna go into law enforcement. I love the idea. I had a relationship with a sergeant growing up that was in the Lansing Police Department. He was kind of a mentor. He was a guy that was always in the community at our school speaking. I always looked up to Sergeant Parks, and I was like, he has a really cool job. And so I just started putting out a bunch of applications and went up to Michigan State, put one in, and by the time I got home, I had a message on my answering machine about, hey, we want to interview. And about a week or so later, they had offered me a job, and that summer I went to the police academy, and it was an awesome career. I used my experience in law enforcement a little differently. I wasn't really interested in chasing around, campus or the city and arresting bad guys. Bad guys was a part of it, but I really was in tune to how with my position do I individually make those who come through Michigan State experience better. And I was really in tune with attending student group meetings and talking to faculty and staff and kind of being an officer, in the community outside of not just making traffic stops or going from call to call. I really wanted to make an impact on students' experience. And so what that actually helped me do was I wasn't intending to do this, but it helped me be able to have conversations with really diverse groups. And at the end of the day, it's exactly what I do now as athletic director. I was involved in a lot of major incidents on campus, talking with a lot of different groups from the president to board of trustees to students, and being able to intersect all of those different groups for 13 years there's no different in terms of the different constituents that I'm talking to now than I was when I was a police officer.
In those 13 years working with the students, what's the biggest thing, Ellen Heller, the students taught you?
That they're individuals, and they all come from a different community. And so, we've got 50,000 students on campus, and we sometimes kind of think we make decisions based off of groups, based off of the large population. And at the end of the day, one of the things I really realized is all of those students come from different experiences. They come from different families and communities, and you have to understand that 4 or 5 years is a really important part of their life, and we have to treat them as individuals and not just as groups. And so I really could you could have 2 black students and they could be totally different. 2 white students, they could be totally different. And the police officer experience and being close and connected to the students helped me understand that. And it's no different than my interactions with our student athletes now. We have 750 or so student athletes, and every single one of them is different.
In 2010, you flip over and then you join the athletic department. How did that come to be?
Well, I was well into my law enforcement career, and at that time, Jack, I wanted to start looking at being a police chief. So I started, interviewing for police chief jobs pretty much in the Midwest. And I had been offered a job at a department in Indiana. Well, backwards a little bit prior to 2010, in 2006, 2007, I was on the search committee that hired Mark D'Antonio. That was Tom Izzo, Mark Hollis, and then the AD, Ron Mason, at the time. And they asked me to be on the search committee because, one, I was a former student athlete and I was in the community. And so they wanted an outside voice that was on that search committee. So in 2006, November 2006, we hire Mark D'Antonio. And then I go back to the police department and work another 3 years. Well, 3 years later, Mark Hollis was the AD. And Mark called me out of the blue one day and said, "Hey, Alan, I enjoyed working with you 3 years ago. I know you want to be a police chief. You expressed that. But, hey, I've got a position in athletics. I think you'd be perfect for it. What do you think?" And he gave me a couple of weeks to think about it. And lo and behold, a couple of weeks later, I was in the athletic department.
And some would say that Alan Heller today is the police chief of MSU athletics. When we come back, we're going to ask him about Mark D'Antonio, who's just going in the Rose Bowl Hall of Fame, and the iconic Mark Hollis.
Yes.
And I'm Jack Krasula, and this is Anything is Possible on 760 WJR. From 1997 to 2010, he was a lieutenant in the Michigan State University Police Department. Coach Mark D'Antonio and Mark Hollis, please.
Wow. Coach D, he's a really, really good friend now. He's actually semi on staff right now. I have him in kind of a consulting position, and he's around quite a bit. He's on my speed dial. I actually was with him last week. He came with us on the trip to Maryland.
Congratulations,
by
the way.
The victory at Maryland. Coach D was there, and he's been a mentor really for the last 15 years or so. You know, Coach D individually touches, obviously he's a great coach, and we've had, my kids grew up on a Rose Bowl team and those Cotton Bowl teams and 4 straight years of 11-plus victories. All of the joy and excitement his teams and his staff brought to the Spartan community, lifetime of memories. He's an icon. But it's funny. So I was an associate athletic director at the time. We go to the Rose Bowl. And I'm with the team and my 2 young kids who are, I think, 8 and 6 at the time. My son was 7, I think. And we go to the Rose Bowl, and we have a team meeting, and all of the staff that's traveling are in the team meeting with their families. And Coach D's up there, and he's talking, and he says, "Hey, we're going to be here a week. So I want everyone," he was talking to players, but he said, "Everyone, I want you to go back to your room. I want you to unpack, because we're not visitors. If you don't unpack and keep all of your clothes in your bag, you'll have the frame of mind that you're not visiting and you don't deserve to be here." So he told everybody to go unpack. So my son, it's like, "Dad, we gotta go." It's like, "Okay." He's like, so we run up to the room. He opens up his bag and he starts throwing all of his clothes in the drawers. I said, "What are you doing?" He's like, "Coach D said we gotta unpack." And so to this day, when we take family trips, my son, who's a sophomore now at Michigan State, he always unpacks when we go on trips. And that's because Coach D told him, when you travel and you go to places, make sure you feel like you're there, because you can do better work that way than just being a visitor.
Mark Hollis.
Wow. You know, I still, you know, I've been in this role for about 3 years, and a lot of the things that I do, from the way I think about things, you know, we're totally different people. Mark is, you know, can go into a room and really gravitate and talk to people, and you know, he has that personality. I'm more of a quiet person. I'll go to the corner unless, I'm more of a one-on-one type of person in terms of speaking and personality. But Mark, his vision, he was a very he had a vision of things that nobody could see. One day he called me in his office, and I had just gotten to the athletic department, and I didn't know him very well. I mean, I knew him, but not very well. And he said, he says, "Hey, Alan, what do you think about having a basketball game on an aircraft carrier?" And I just laughed.
And inviting the president and his wife.
I was like, "Oh, that's so funny." He's like, No, serious. I want you to help me put this thing together. And I went back to my office. I still didn't know if he was really, serious, but he was. So we played a basketball game on an aircraft carrier. And it was, way beyond his time in terms of those types of things. But then, also what he did for our teams and our community and putting an environment in place where we could be successful. So Mark is a good friend still, and I still rely on a lot of those experiences with what I'm doing right now.
All right, 3 years later, after being announced as the athletic director, you've made some very successful coaching hires. Football, hockey, women's basketball, volleyball. Ellen Heller. What is an Ellen Heller MSU coach?
Yeah. Also hired men's tennis and rowing. Those are really, really important positions. It's based off of the needs. Some people have said that I have a type of coach, and that's not necessarily true. The type of coach, yes, values, integrity, a resume of success. All of those things are really, really important. But what I try to do individually with our teams is kind of assess where the team is and then what's needed. And I go out and try to get that person that's needed. For hockey, Jack, I didn't know hockey very well. I could hire a volleyball coach because my daughter grew up in volleyball, and I went to games, went to practices. I understand everything behind volleyball and all of the things that go with volleyball. I understand it. Hockey, not so much. So I put an alumni group together of former players, and they helped me understand the game, and then I met with the current players. We had lunch one day, and basically we sat down on the table, and I said, "Hey, what do you need in a coach?" And they went around the room and they told me, and they talked about things like puck possession and all of these different things. So I started interviewing coaches, and I got to Adam Nightingale, and one of the things Adam mentioned was, I really stress puck possession. I said, "Ooh, I remember that word." That's not why I hired Adam, but we really needed a coach who could teach, and the players wanted somebody that could teach them the game, that was really focused on skills. And then Adam had a lot of relationships in junior hockey, and I learned through talking to the former players. He was like, "Alan, we need relationships back into junior hockey," and they explained to me why all of that was important, and that was Adam's background. He was perfect for the job, and so went with him. And then Robin Freilich in women's basketball. She had a tremendous record, won a national title in Division II, 2 national titles, undefeated seasons. And then at Bowling Green, she really flipped that program. I had the opportunity during the search process. She didn't know I was there, but I went down to Bowling Green and actually was in the arena and watched her coach a game against Florida in the NIT tournament. And she never sat down. The fans really gravitated to the style of play. It was fast. The players looked like they were having fun. She was really into it. And I said, I think that would translate to what we want to see at Michigan State. So I don't have necessarily a type, but I do have, based off of where the team is, where I want to go with our coaching staffs.
All right. Following up on you said, we need somebody who can teach.
Yeah.
Tom Izzo has said that a college coach is as much a teacher as most professors. Please.
Yeah, and what he means by that, because I've been around him quite a bit, it's not necessarily a teacher of the game. Like there are things you do in life from the way you carry yourself that translates to success. And that's what Tom is about. He's about how you carry yourself, how you interact with people, how you prepare yourself, not only for practice, but in life in general. And so Tom really is focused on mindset and being able to be in a place where individually you can prepare yourself for what he's trying to do, because Tom is not an easy person to play for. He's not an easy person to work for. And there are times it's challenging to work with him, not in the way that he's a difficult person, but he's very, very demanding. He knows what he wants, and he knows the pathway to success, and not everybody can live in that environment. And I've been very, very fortunate to be close to him. I've learned so much for him. Technically, I'm his supervisor, but I don't always look at it like that. Jack, literally a lot of my major decisions, even small decisions, I pick up the phone and I'll call Tom, or I'll we're very, very close in terms of our offices. I'll get out and I'll walk into his office and say, "Hey, I got this. What do you think?" why don't we do, so he helps me really, run things that, things that are way outside of his program. And why wouldn't I not use that as a resource? The man is tremendous. He loves Michigan State. He loves his family. He's one of our big donors to the athletic department. He gives us resources. So if I didn't use him because of what he's meant for our community, that a lot of athletic directors might get in this position like, I'm running things, I'm going to do things my way. No, I run a lot of things through that man, and he's been very, very helpful.
You've gone to thousands of MSU sporting events.
Yeah.
And you hear this fight song played each time. Alan Heller, when you hear the fight song played, what do you think and what do you do?
Jack, for me, as the athletic director, I go to most of our home games in all of our sports. And I travel quite a bit with some of our other teams away, not just football and the basketball teams. I travel. I'm a fan first. I love what our student athletes do, the dedication they have to their art, to what they're doing, how they perfect it in practice and throughout the year, and then they go and play. And so I love the performance of our student athletes. And then also man, you're going to get me emotional here, but I love what it does to our community and how it brings people together. So there's many, many times I'll be on the sidelines or I'll be at an event, and I'm not necessarily always watching the event. I'm just looking in the stands. We did that at Maryland last week, and we had, 500 MSU fans behind us at Maryland. And I caught myself turning around, and when there was a good play and I'd hear go green, go white, just seeing the joy in people and what this does for them and what it does for their families and the love they have for Michigan State through athletics. That's really why I do this job. It's to represent Michigan State. And so every alum, every person that follows Michigan State feels a certain way about Michigan State because what they see going on in athletics. That's what we do. It's not about championships all the time. Sometimes it's not even about winning. It's really about how we go about our business. And I want that alum in California to never. I had a lady in California, and I was out there for a fundraising event several years ago. And she came up to me. She said, Alan, I haven't been back to campus in several years, but I've never been prouder to be a Spartan because of what I see happening in athletics. That's why I do the job.
We're talking to Alan Heller. And Mark Hollis recently told me, Jack, he's a great athletic director. And he's a Hall of Fame man. And I'm Jack Krasula, and this is Anything is Possible on 760 WJR. I'm Jack Krasula. This is Anything is Possible. We're talking to Alan Heller, MSU Athletic Director. If you want to learn more, www.msuspartans.com. All right, Coach Jonathan Smith, please.
Well, Jonathan, one, is a really good person, and that's important. But when I was doing this search, I'll be honest, he probably wasn't at the top of the list. You start these searches and you don't want to rank people too early, but you start these searches and you think, I want this person or I want that person. But one of the pluses I had last year in that, a lot of times you're hiring someone in a 3-week time span. I had the whole season. So I had a whole season of being able to evaluate. Jack, I would come home after our games, and because of Jonathan playing out west for Oregon State, I found myself up at 2 o'clock in the morning sometimes watching Pac-12 games, just, try to get in the sense of what he was doing. And as the season went along, I really liked the product that I saw. And so I started looking at press conferences. I read all the media clippings, and I tried to talk to as many people about them really knowing what I was doing about Jonathan and what was going on there. So as the year went on, he kind of slowly started, to rise to the top of the list, and then interviewed him, went out there to see him in person, and sat in the house with him and his wife, Candace. Had a great 3-4 hours there, and I left there thinking, all right, I want to put him in the top 3. And then I got home, flew home, and I said, no, he's our number 1 candidate. And I canceled the other visits. And I said, I want to go after Jonathan. And lucky for us, it was a connection. It's something that he wanted to do. And he had an eye for Michigan State. He'd always followed Michigan State. And He's been great. Players absolutely love him. Not love him, and people say he's a player's coach, or we want someone that's a player's coach. Sometimes when you get a player's coach, you get someone that doesn't have boundaries and rules, and not Jonathan. When I say he's a player's coach, he gets the best out of them through their own individual desire to be great, and he taps into that. And I think the players love that part about him. And I'm just really excited for what's next for us in the pro football program and what's next for these student athletes.
All right. There's 23 teams within the athletic department.
Yeah.
You mentioned about 750 student athletes. Tell us about a typical day for a student athlete at MSU today.
Yeah, so I brought in a consulting firm early on in my time in athletics, and they put a map of Michigan State University, and then we invited 12 students from various teams. And what we did was each student got up with a marker, and we asked them to start your day with where you are on campus and go through everything. So we call it a footprint. And I was amazed at the footprint of our student athletes, starting in their dorms, going to class, then going back to their dorms, going to another class, going to lunch, going to practice, back to their dorm, and then back, to study. And some of these students were putting in miles and miles of walking. And so what we have tried to do from a facility standpoint, but then from a scheduling standpoint with our teams is, I've told our coaches and our sport administrators, I want to shrink our student athletes' footprint. I don't want them walking all across campus, spending most of their day, walking. So for instance, Jonathan Smith practiced in the morning for the football team. So the football team gets up, the first thing they do is they practice. And then all of our student athletes in football have classes that start after 11:30 and go through the afternoon. It really shrinks their footprint and allows them, to really focus on class and practice and training differently and not integrate them all together where you're trying to do all of them in once. And I'm amazed. I think my day is busy, but our student athletes start at 5:30 in the morning sometimes, and they're going till 10:30 at night. And it's really, really good training for life.
All right, speaking of being amazed, in the spring of 2023, the MSU Athletic Department compiled a record-breaking cumulative 3.32 GPA, the highest in school history. Steve Courtney says the only time he ever got a 3.3 was a cholesterol level.
Unbelievable. I mean, and with that, all 23 teams had a 3.0 average or higher. The first time in the history of athletics at MSU where all of our teams, the average GPA on those teams were 3.0 or higher. So first time, I was a football student athletes for 4 years. We never had anywhere close to a 3.0. And that football team, going through all the challenges they went through last year, finished the year with a 3.0 grade point average. So that says so much about those student athletes. But just in general, we had 120 of our student athletes had a 4.0. That's amazing.
Wow.
We have a 91% graduation success rate. So our student athletes are graduating. They're getting their degrees. They're going to class. They're integrating their experience into the academic setting, because at the end of the day, you're on the college campus to be a student, and then the athlete piece comes next. And our student athletes and our staff at the at the Smith Center that work with the academic side of athletics do a phenomenal job personalizing everything that they need for students, so for our student athletes to be successful in their own experience. And again, I want to say this: 23 teams with a 3.0 or higher. That was a major accomplishment for us last year. We won 6 Big Ten titles in athletics and in sports, but to do that is remarkable.
Alan Heller, you are a 4.0 as a man. Keep up the great work.
Appreciate it, Jack. Thanks for having me.
Please join us next week. Until then, I'm Jack Krasula. Thanks for listening, and make it a great week, because with God, anything is possible. Spohom.